I'd like to say thank you for the organizers for inviting me to this. I'm very excited to talk about this topic. My topic is on a case study in alpha-gal mammalian meat allergy, which is one of the more exciting allergies that we deal with. So I have no disclosures. So I would first like to provide some background and tell the story of how cancer researchers actually helped us uncover a novel food allergy. So the story actually starts with a cancer drug. Then I'll circle around to the food allergy again. But this cancer drug is called cetuximab. So cetuximab is a chimeric monoclonal antibody, meaning it's derived both from human and mouse components. So in 2007, cetuximab was being widely used as salvage therapy and in phase 3 trials for treatment of various types of cancer. It had a relatively good safety profile throughout the US and Europe. The hypersensitivity rate or allergic reaction rate was around 1% throughout the US and Europe, but there was one exception to this. So providers within the Southeast US were finding it increasingly difficult to give this medication to their patients because they were having a high rate of hypersensitivity or allergic reactions, usually on the first administration of this medication. So further investigation, specifically in the states of Tennessee and North Carolina, showed that there was an increased rate of hypersensitivity reaction, so 20 to 25% compared to the 1% throughout Europe and the US, and that was specific to North Carolina and Tennessee. So after this publication came out in 2007, more reports emerged throughout the Southeast US of cases of increased hypersensitivity reactions to cetuximab. So this was weird. So of course there was further investigation. And the research that was done showed that most cetuximab reactions were due to an antibody specific to galactose alpha-1,3 galactose, otherwise known as alpha-gal. So on cetuximab, alpha-gal is located in the portion of the drug that is mouse-derived. So I don't know if yes, you guys can see my pointer. So it's this blue portion right here on the drug molecule, and this red highlighted portion is actually the alpha-gal region that patients were forming antibodies to. So the studies that were done showed that patients who reacted to this medication developed the antibody even before being exposed to cetuximab. This was a very interesting aspect of this because most patients did not have an allergy history, and most were not prone to drug allergies or allergies to any kind of foods or anything. And they specifically in their research asked, do these patients have any allergy to specific foods? And so they asked about beef, pork, or cow's milk. All the patients denied any kind of rapid onset allergic reactions. But on further questioning, the patients would say, well, wait, I do have this weird reaction. They would have anaphylaxis or swelling 1 to 3 hours after eating beef or pork. And this was a common occurrence or a common reported side effect throughout the research studies. So around this time, allergy offices were also hearing a new complaint of these weird allergic reactions to beef. So we would hear patients complain that the reactions don't happen right away. The reactions don't even happen every time. And then sometimes the reactions are really bad. Other times it's just a little bit of itching. Patients were also starting to note that it would happen both to pork and lamb as well. So case studies began to emerge in 2009 documenting this unusual complaint within the Southeast US. So the first series of case reports on this was on 24 patients in Virginia and Missouri. These patients were also found to have antibodies against alpha-gal. So that was the missing link between this weird food allergy and those patients experiencing anaphylaxis from cetuximab. So what is alpha-gal? Alpha-gal is, as stated previously, an easier to pronounce shorthand for galactose alpha-1,3 galactose. So this is a carbohydrate synthesized by the glycosylation enzyme alpha-1,3 galactosyl transferase. So alpha-gal is present on the tissues and cells of all non-primate mammals, but it is not present in humans and apes due to an inactive gene product. So next, scientists were tasked with defining a new food allergy and had to ask themselves a very difficult question: what is alpha-gal syndrome? But in order to understand the difficulty of this, let me first provide some context with what is known about food allergies. So our previous understanding of food allergy over the years told us that these allergic reactions were immediate, and to us as allergists, that means within 1 to 2 hours. So with very few exceptions, they also food allergies presented in childhood, and usually also in children who are, quote, prone to develop allergies. So antibodies that triggered the reaction formed to a protein component of the offending food and not a carbohydrate. So most food allergic patients are also thought to be primed or become allergic via an initial exposure with reaction occurring at a secondary exposure. And so although this process is not very well understood, the thought is that, or the hypothesis is that first exposure can occur via skin. So especially in children who have eczema or a dysfunctional skin barrier, they can be exposed to the allergen and then develop a food allergy that way. So how do we define alpha-gal syndrome? So first of all, it's named alpha-gal syndrome and not alpha-gal allergy to reflect the spectrum of clinical symptoms that result from sensitization or allergy to alpha-gal. So this syndrome is otherwise known as red meat or mammalian meat allergy, although, as I will discuss, the allergy often extends beyond just meat. So unlike conventional food allergy, alpha-gal syndrome challenges what we know about food allergy, as these patients have variability in the types of symptoms that they experience, the timing of symptomatic onset, and then also the types and amounts of ingested foods that cause these symptoms. So one of the key features of alpha-gal syndrome is that the allergic symptoms are delayed after ingestion of mammalian meat. So symptoms of hives, swelling, and anaphylaxis can present 3 to 6 hours or even longer after food ingestion. So when we were first beginning to study this unique food allergy, it was very common to have our patients come into clinic and perform what we would call a food challenge on these patients to sort of prove whether or not they did have alpha-gal. And we would commonly use pork sausage to do this. So this gentleman depicted in the pictures is an example of a patient who came in for a food challenge. And hope you can appreciate that at 6 hours, his skin looks completely clear. He is at his baseline state of health. And so at that point, we decided to let him leave the clinic and go home, as we anticipated his challenge was negative at that time. However, as he made it home, 7.5 hours later, his reaction actually started to develop. You can appreciate in the next picture that his skin is covered in a red, itchy rash. And unfortunately, although the physicians at the time recommended that his wife treat him with antihistamines and epinephrine, his wife just wanted to, quote, see what would happen. And so they let him continue to progress. And at greater than 8 hours after his food ingestion, I hope you can appreciate that he's covered in hives. This is something that we definitely do not recommend. Most patients who are allowed to continue to progress will require epinephrine, and this gentleman was very lucky. But as this demonstrates, it can be even longer than 6 hours for the presenting symptoms. But also another caveat, it's not always a delayed reaction, so other variables can also cause a quicker onset of symptoms, which I'll discuss here in a little bit. And then also one difficulty of this syndrome is that symptoms may vary from patient to patient, and then also from exposure to food exposure. So most symptoms are along the severe spectrum So anaphylaxis, we encourage all of our patients to carry an EpiPen with them because of the potential for anaphylaxis. But also swelling and hives can occur too. Some patients, however, are very lucky and they may only experience symptoms of abdominal discomfort and pain. So another feature of alpha-gal syndrome is the type of food and the amount of food that causes symptoms varies greatly in each individual. So some patients react only to red meat, so that would be beef, pork, and lamb, among other things. And others can also have reactions to dairy products, and very rarely gelatin can also be a precipitating food. Another interesting feature of this is the amount of alpha-gal within the food can vary. So there are higher concentrations of alpha-gal in foods derived from internal organs. So an example of this would be pork kidney. And then also lipid-rich foods, so things like steak and ice cream. And then due to a wide variability in both the alpha-gal content and then also the foods that are required to cause reactions, allergen thresholds have been very difficult to obtain for this disease process. And then also, as I discussed earlier, other variables may lower the threshold of reactivity and then also could produce a quicker onset of reactivity. These include alcohol, exercise, and typically the exercise is usually within an hour or so prior to ingestion of foods. And then also anti-inflammatory medications, so these would be like NSAIDs and ibuprofen. So how do people who could typically eat red meat for most of their lives suddenly develop reactions to it? And this is a very interesting question for us to try to answer. So let's first revisit the distribution of increased cetuximab reactions, highlighted in red, and then followed by the distribution of alpha-gal diagnoses in 2011. And you can see the states that have a star have at least 25 cases of alpha-gal. And then now let's go to present-day diagnoses of alpha-gal. You can see a very clear geographic pattern that has emerged, and it's mostly located within the southeast U.S. And this is a pattern that also began to closely resemble the distribution of another disease process, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, as depicted in the states in the dark purple coloration. So Rocky Mountain spotted fever is known to be transmitted by tick bites from the Lone Star tick, also called Amblyomma americanum. It is named for the star-shaped marking on its back. Its distribution has historically been within the southeast United States, but is now becoming more widespread, as you can see more in the northeast U.S. and then further west as well. And that's because of changing weather patterns that have created a more favorable living environment for the tick. So exposure to tick bites has been shown to induce the production of alpha-gal antibodies in humans. Increased number of exposures or bites can increase alpha-gal antibody numbers within a patient. So recent work has shown that several species of ticks, including the Lone Star tick, carry alpha-gal within their gut. So this is then thought to be transferred to humans via a tick bite, exposing the alpha-gal that's within the tick gut to the bloodstream and then thus the human immune system, causing or inducing this allergic type process. And then this picture is of a foot that is not normal. Hopefully you could appreciate multiple bites on this foot. There are hundreds of bites on it. And this is actually a pretty common occurrence in the southeast U.S. This is after exposure to what we call seed ticks. And so usually people, whenever they're on a walk, can be exposed to seed ticks who nest in the hundreds. An example of what seed ticks look like is here in the top picture, this small tick in the top picture, and then on the bottom picture, the A and B figure. So you could see how tiny these are in comparison to the adult stage. Seed ticks are the nymph phase of the ticks, and they're called seed ticks because they resemble poppy seeds. So unfortunately, exposure to one can mean exposure to hundreds as they nest together. And this is a common occurrence in the southeast U.S. So how do we manage our patients with this food allergy? Or otherwise, how do you tell your patients they can no longer eat the foods that they love? It's very difficult. Management seems very simple on first glance. Avoidance of red meat, avoidance of ticks. However, it is a little more complicated due to patient variability and alpha-gal diagnoses. So initial management is based on avoiding the precipitating foods. So for most, this means avoiding red meat, beef, pork, and lamb, among other meats. But then for others, this may also include dairy products, as I alluded to earlier, and then very rarely gelatin. So we caution our patients to avoid the fattier types of these foods, such as steak and ice cream, as these seem to be not as well tolerated as leaner food items, or as the leaner food items within the same food group. However, dairy and cheese are usually tolerated, and then also gelatin. Very rarely do we have to recommend avoidance for that. Most of our patients have, some of our patients, I'll say, have found it easier just to avoid all meat in general and have adopted more of like a vegan or vegetarian lifestyle. These are usually the people who don't like eating chicken or fish in the first place, and so they just say like, I'll just cut it all out. However, a lot of our patients have been very creative with their diets, and at least within our patient population, a lot of our patients have tried emu meat, which I've been told is very similar tasting to beef. I haven't tried it myself, though. Another potential option in the near future, which we and our patients are very excited about, is the possibility of a knockout pig that has alpha-gal negative gene knockout. So this is not yet available, but could potentially be available in the near future, and could be applicable to other products other than just the food products of this pig. So another key to management is avoidance of ticks. As I discussed earlier, this can be very difficult in the southeast U.S. And if you look at this picture, this is a gentleman who has put double-sided tape on his ankles, and after just a short walk in the woods, he has collected several different ticks on his feet, so it can be very difficult. So we know that increased exposure to tick bites causes increased levels of alpha-gal antibodies within our patients. And also, anecdotally, patients seem to be able to outgrow alpha-gal syndrome with avoidance. So avoidance could potentially allow patients to outgrow this disease process faster. And then because alpha-gal's presentation can be so variable, even within individuals, we caution our patients on other factors that may lower their threshold for a reaction if accidental food exposure occurs. So that, again, is exercise, alcohol, and NSAIDs. And then also additional precautions include medications and devices derived from non-primate mammals, and that can be heart valves like bioprosthetics, and then also different medications as discussed earlier, cetuximab, and then possibly heparin. So one of the things, and hopefully this will help depict how difficult it is for our patients to avoid different products that aren't necessarily food products. As you can see, there are several different byproducts that come from both cow and pigs. So among other things in this picture, you could see like different medications, you could see gelatin, you could see refined sugar, all cow-derived. And then similarly with the pig, again, like gelatin, Here also, like ingredients for surgical sutures, that is an invasive exposure, and so we have to caution our patients on that. And then also different like insulin and other hormones that are derived from these animals. And then notably hearts for transplantation too. We have had patients who have needed heart transplants and then also heart valves for whatever reason and had alpha-gal, and it can be very difficult coming to a good clinical decision for those patients who have alpha-gal. So because alpha-gal's presentation, because patients with alpha-gal seem to be able to grow out of this over time, our management also includes monitoring the antibodies, and that allows us to be able to assess when it's appropriate and safe for them to be able to introduce the food back into their diets. So where is alpha-gal throughout the world? Because we are now seeing alpha-gal cases throughout the globe and not just in the Southeast U.S. So patients who have reported similar clinical reactions to red meat and who have also had positive alpha-gal antibodies during blood work have now been described on 6 different continents, making this new allergy of global interest. So cases have now been reported in Australia, Sweden, Germany, Japan, South Africa, and even in Central America here. So it's very similar to the Lone Star tick. These cases have all been associated with a local species of tick, not the Lone Star tick, but other various species that are local to where these cases have been reported. And so there have been associations in Europe, in Japan and South Korea, in Australia, in South Africa, and then also Central America and Brazil with different species of ticks. So where do we go from here? There's still very many unknowns. One of the questions that we have is, what is the exact mechanism of developing this food allergy? We know that tick exposure is associated with alpha-gal syndrome, but what is the immunology mechanism that links a tick bite to an allergic response? And why are some people prone to this and others are not? Because these aren't your typical allergic patients who contract this allergy. And then also, can we predict the duration of alpha-gal syndrome, as some patients seem to eventually outgrow this allergy? And then a related question, how often do we monitor this and monitor patients' labs? And then when do we do a food challenge to see if this allergy has actually resolved or not? And then similarly to other food allergies, could we potentially treat this food allergy? And then also, how strict should we be with avoidance of mammalian-derived products? As I showed earlier, that could be quite difficult to do, although it may or may not lead to reactivity in patients. It's unclear whether or not the safer approach is to caution patients on avoiding all of these products. And then also, are there causes other than ticks? So are there other ectoparasites that could be to blame or causative in this development? So in summary, alpha-gal syndrome is a novel allergy to mammalian meat and products that challenges our common knowledge about food allergies, as reactions can be both inconsistent and also delayed. Management includes avoidance of red meat and sometimes other mammalian products, including dairy, gelatin, and some medications and bioprosthetics. So evidence also suggests that tick bites may cause this allergy, and further tick exposure can also affect the alpha-gal antibody levels in some patients, and possibly prolonging this allergy. So future research efforts will focus on a better understanding of the mechanics of this food allergy and how it develops in certain people. So I'd like to say a special thanks to all of our scientific contributors, especially my mentor, Scott Cummins, among many other people who have contributed to this work. Thank you.